We'll come back to more of this conversation, but I want to continue to Olivia. I think, in the description here, I think there's some sort of talk about laptop performance, but probably neither of us is so afraid of doing laptop performance. And some of the stuff that you're doing with laptops, I think, also connects to the circumstances and social environments that Isabel just spoke to in ways that people might not expect. So, Olivia, we'll turn it over to you and show us a bit of how you're redefining your performance persona through the software, computer, screens, browsers, all the stuff that you use.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to talk a little bit about my practice using software as a live instrument. I'm a programmer and an artist, and I work a lot with live interfaces, using the browser as a context for creative experimentation, and also live performances. And I'm specifically going to talk about a project called Hydra. And Hydra is an online video synthesizer that it's open source and it runs in any browser. And basically, it's a project that I made, I think now starting 3 years ago. And basically, you use Hydra directly by writing code in the browser. And this code kind of, as soon as you write it, affects the images that you see on the screen. And it's inspired by analog modular synthesis. And so it's really focused on kind of using and mixing multiple sources and outputs live. And the code that you write live affects this sort of, these visuals that appear on the screen. And so in Hydra, any camera or any sort of screen can be used as an input. And it's something I started making just sort of as a set of explorations just for myself in order to explore kind of ideas about how I wanted to write software, and be able to kind of write code and immediately see what happens with it, and also kind of having such an immediate access to the camera and to different sources, like different windows, for me was kind of, I think it just started as playful explorations for myself of like, what can I do with this setup? And also in Hydra, anyone else who is connected to the website, you can stream what they're doing, and it could be a part of what you're doing. And so in some ways, it's this video synthesizer that is live online all of the time, and it's kind of distributed and collaborative. And this is kind of inspiring to me hearing about Isabel's work, is just the idea of creating a context. And in this case, it's like kind of an online context, but sort of a context for some sort of live event to happen. And I think for me, it was sort of a helpful framework for thinking about my practice, is this idea of creating a context and kind of hosting people through it. And for me, I always feel like I'm just learning or just beginning, even though now it's been like maybe 10 years or something that I'm doing this, but it's always like, oh, and now what will I do next with this? And so this, for example, was an experiment with a live stream from Times Square and a live stream from an aquarium, and then me live coding on top of it. And these are just sort of like experiments that I do at home and then put online. But and now Hydra is online, and there's lots of people all over the world who use it, and they sort of use it in different ways that, for me, I never imagined that they would use it this way or this other way. So it's really exciting to kind of see it take on a life of its own in this way. And it's very, the code itself, it's very kind of directly controlling the pixel colors and using the graphics card. But just being able to use a camera and experiment with it kind of creates things that end up can seem sort of complex, like as if there was computer vision or motion tracking or all of this stuff involved. But in reality, I'm just sort of using like cameras and pixel colors as inputs. And most of my work at this point is pretty focused on visual, but lately I've been interested in exploring these kinds of ideas related to sound as well. And this is an example where I'm just the changes in pixel colors are controlling triggering samples. And so there's no actual motion tracking or anything like this, but then I'm able to control the image while the samples are playing. And I'll just let it play for a sec. For me, this was sort of a way of creating a sequencer out of physical space, but kind of a very like simple way in terms of the computer of just putting these different languages in conversation with each other. The language of the computer, a visual language, my camera and the gestures that I'm making, and then also sound, which I think could be really complicated, but it also can be something that sort of, if you're watching it, you can sort of see the ways that these things are talking to each other, even if you don't necessarily understand all of the code. And so this process has then become what started as sort of me playing with my computer has then become sort of a performative process where I end up doing these kinds of things in front of an audience. And so in this case, kind of showing the screen and showing my text editor, and often contextualized in sort of live coding or algorithm type events, but not exclusively that. And so here's an example of one performance that I did earlier this year in January. And as you can see, I just sort of I'm showing my text editor, and actually the movements of my mouse on the text editor and the movements of writing code are both kind of, you can see the process, but it's also creating the visuals behind it. And this was a collaboration with a musician that was all kind of improvised. And all these sort of motions in the editor of just scrolling or highlighting the text, I guess part of this. And so to me, it's kind of exciting to do this live in front of people, but I think I'm still kind of processing why other people are interested in it sometimes. But it's been fun. And the last live performance I want to show was from last year at the planetarium in Bogota. And to me, this was really exciting because instead of just projecting my code kind of on a small screen, because I do get kind of frustrated with the screen, this got to be my browser and text editor, but projected on an entire dome. So I will show that. Yeah, and that again was just my text editor, and some of the like comments were just the cursor moving. And I think it was also exciting because I kind of created this browser toy, and I think sometimes people are like, "Oh, that's great, that's a fun little toy" or something, but it's not professional. And sometimes in the software world, there's this idea of certain things are kind of professional, and to do a live performance, you need this specific technology or this CDJ or this, I don't know, this speaker or all these things. And I kind of like this idea of, like, okay, we can hack it ourselves. And so, thank you.
Yeah, great. We have to imagine applause, but I feel the applause. Actually, I wanted to ask you before we move on to Rebecca. Maybe I had the same reaction you did, sort of listening to Isabel, but I was curious if you ever thought of these kind of online browser collaborative situations in the same way as these social configurations, right? And that is it somehow creating sort of different interactions for people to be social with one another, either kind of virtually online through the browser or in the way that impacts the performance?
Yeah, I really do think about the software in this kind of social way, and I think a lot. So I think much of what I do is focused on kind of creating different contexts where people can collaborate with each other or interact with each other in different ways. For example, I made an online editor for Hydra called Pixel Jam that there's no login. It's just anonymous, but you can join and write code that affects the visuals of 3 different kind of channels. And I found that people ended up kind of going there and just hanging out for a while. And so much of the internet is like these walled spaces where you have to have an account and a persistent identity, compared to, I don't know, something like going to a club where you can kind of be anonymous or in public space and interact with other people. And so, my online code editor is very different from a club, but I guess part of my interest in it is creating like an anonymous public space on the internet that feels like positive or feels interesting to me. And especially during the pandemic, I think just seeing how people have interacted with these tools is exciting about creating these different contexts.
Did people mostly retain their anonymity, or were there times where people try to kind of identify as who they are to reconnect with people that maybe they wouldn't see otherwise? Because I've been curious about that myself.
I felt like mostly people used kind of like a screen name that would connect to like their screen name in Instagram or in some other context.
So that would,
and some people kind of met each other through this and then collaborated after this, just meeting each other by writing code to each other.
Interesting.
But I think it's really interesting hearing Isabel's work because I do often, I think when I think about my practice, I think about creating these contexts that I more like understand as my artistic practice, even more so than like performing by writing code live or something. Right. That's something that just sort of happened afterwards, I think.
Well, I mean, that's the thing that everybody wants to ask about, right? Because especially if they haven't seen it before. Like if people go to a live coding performance for the first time, or they now see it in a browser, that aspect of being able to see the code for people is still pretty novel. But I wondered, like, was it more an aesthetic thing, kind of when it was projected in the dome in Bogota, or is that another kind of social thread, the fact that you can kind of look at the code and see what's going on?
Yeah, I have that question as well. I think, for example, in the dome, I don't know how much it mattered that there was code or that I was there, because I think so much was like being transported in the dome, and so maybe it wouldn't have made that much difference if it had been recorded, which is something I sometimes feel with live AV performances. Or sometimes I'm not sure whether it matters that the person's there, and sometimes it does feel like it matters that the person is there.
I mean, at the same time, maybe it's important to say with your work that, I mean, this is really this is really deeply rooted in analog video technique, right? Which maybe is not true of all live coding performances. But because since part of our topic today was kind of understanding the laptop and all of this, I mean, part of what the laptop has done for us is make some of those technologies that required specific laboratories and lots of very specialized and very expensive and heavy equipment is now accessible to a lot more screens and things. I don't know if that kind of accessibility was also important to you.
Yeah, that's really important to me, I think, and also that this kind of real-time graphics on a computer is now something that most phones can do as well, and so in theory, like almost anyone could do these kinds of performances, and I think another part where the analog piece kind of being inspired comes into play is. Like often I feel like computers are used to do very kind of precise things that you know ahead of time and can control what will happen. And what's exciting to me is use these technologies to sort of do the opposite and kind of set up these more dynamic situations that to me then become more interesting live, maybe because you don't exactly know what will happen.
Well, so interesting to kind of hear that discussion as an instrument and also instrumental practice that's rooted in this kind of video history, which to me still looks fresh. Like I feel differently. I feel about it now. This is, you were sending me examples from kind of historical AV pieces, and I suddenly feel differently in 2020 in the middle of this pandemic than I think if you'd sent them to me 2 years ago, actually. So with that in mind, to kind of go from those instruments to other instruments, and those of you at home, just, put on another tea or coffee.